My name is Margaret Hayes, and I am 78 years old. I have lived long enough to bury a husband, raise 2 children, and see my grandchildren take their first steps. Life has given me laughter and scars in equal measure, and I thought I had reached the age where respect would be my companion. But that night at the dinner table with my in-laws, I learned that even the ones you love the most can cut you the deepest. The restaurant was buzzing with soft jazz and the clinking of glasses when my son Daniel and my daughter Grace leaned toward me. Their faces carried polite smiles for everyone else, but their whispers sliced through me like glass. "Don't talk too much tonight, Mom. You embarrass us." Their words were hushed, almost casual, yet they landed with the force of a slap. For a moment, I froze. I could feel the heat rise to my cheeks, the sting of humiliation burning behind my eyes. The laughter from the other tables felt cruel, even though it had nothing to do with me. I glanced at my plate, willing my trembling hands to stay steady. Every instinct screamed to defend myself, to remind them who I was, who I had always been for them. But instead, I just smiled. It was a small, tight smile, one they didn't notice because they were already busy chatting with their spouses as if nothing had happened. I didn't speak for the rest of the evening. I simply listened, nodding at the right times, swallowing the bitterness like a pill too large to go down. Inside, though, something shifted. Something strong and cold. My children had no idea what they had just awakened in me. That night, I went home, sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea, and stared at the framed photos of them through the years. The babies I had cradled, the kids I had sacrificed for, the adults I had supported in every way I could. How quickly love can feel like a chain when it's no longer appreciated. The next morning, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. I dressed in my best coat, grabbed my purse, and walked to my lawyer's office without saying a word to anyone. When I stepped out later that day, the air smelled fresher, and I felt taller. Because I had rewritten my will, and not in the way they would expect. The real shock would come soon enough, and I couldn't wait to see their faces. But before I tell you what I did, you need to understand why that moment at dinner cut so deep. You need to know where it all began and how love slowly turned into something I no longer recognized. This is the story of how I smiled at my children's disrespect and silently planned a move that would change everything. Stay with me, because what happened next will leave you breathless. Please like, comment, and subscribe to this channel so you don't miss what comes next. The next morning, as sunlight streamed through my curtains, I sat at my kitchen table holding an old photo album. My fingers traced the edges of Daniel's baby picture, the tiny fists, the toothless smile. Grace's picture was next, her curls bouncing as she giggled in her little yellow dress. I remembered the nights I stayed awake sewing clothes for them because we couldn't afford new ones. I remembered skipping meals so they would eat, working double shifts so their school fees were paid. I had given everything. Everything. As I flipped through the pages, the weight of last night's humiliation pressed heavier on my chest. Was this what I deserved after a lifetime of sacrifices? My own children telling me to stay silent because my words embarrassed them? The thought gnawed at me like a rat in the dark. But instead of crying, I felt something awaken in me, a fire that had been dormant for years. You see, age doesn't make you weak. Age makes you wise. It gives you the patience to sit quietly while the world thinks you're powerless, until the moment you decide to act. Later that day, I called my friend Linda. She's been by my side since we were girls, someone who knows when my silence is louder than words. "Margaret, what's wrong?" she asked the second she heard my voice. I told her everything, every word my children had whispered to me at that dinner table. I expected her to tell me to let it go, to make excuses for them like I always did. But instead, she said, "You don't deserve that. You've done too much for them to be treated like this." That sentence sealed my resolve. The following day, I visited Mr. Collins, my lawyer. He raised his brow when I walked in, his warm smile welcoming me as always. "Margaret, to what do I owe this visit?" "I need to make changes to my will," I said, my voice steady, calm. He nodded, pulling out the papers. "Any particular adjustments?" I leaned forward, and for the first time in years, I felt powerful. "Yes," I whispered. I want to remove Daniel and Grace as my primary beneficiaries. They've forgotten who I am. I need to remind them, just not the way they expect. We spent hours going over details. By the time I left his office, I felt like a storm brewing quietly on the horizon. No one could see it yet, but it was coming. That evening, Daniel called. "Mom, sorry about the other night," he said casually, as if an apology thrown like a bone to a dog would erase the sting. "You know how things are, you just talk too much sometimes." I smiled into the phone, though my heart ached. "Of course, dear. I understand." He had no idea I was already setting the stage for their wake-up call. The next days passed quietly. Grace stopped by, tossing a bag of groceries on the counter, like she was doing me a favor. She barely looked at me as she scrolled through her phone, muttering about how busy her life was. She didn't notice that I was watching her with a new kind of gaze, not the doting mother, but the woman who was no longer willing to be invisible. As she left, she kissed my cheek distractedly and said, "Don't say anything weird at Sunday's lunch, okay?" I nodded. "I'll be quiet." Oh, how quiet I would be. You see, the dinner with my in-laws was not the end. It was the beginning of my silence. But behind that silence, plans were moving. I started reaching out to people who had been kind to me over the years. My neighbor Carla, who always checked in on me. The young gardener who refused payment when he trimmed my hedges. The local library where I spent my afternoons. If my children thought I was an embarrassment, they were about to learn that their mother still had power they couldn't control. But the real twist? That would come when they least expected it. Because what I did next not only shocked them, it changed the entire course of our lives forever. You won't believe what happened at the next family gathering. Please like, comment, and subscribe to this channel because what comes next will leave you speechless. 3 days after rewriting my will, I sat alone on the porch swing, sipping tea as the sun began to set. The sky was a painting of orange and purple hues, and for the first time in years, I felt at peace. My children thought I was weak. Oh, how wrong they were. But peace never lasts long when secrets are waiting to be revealed. That Sunday, Daniel and Grace invited me to another family lunch. This time, it was at Grace's house, a sprawling suburban home she never lets me forget I helped her afford. I wore my best dress, the one with tiny blue flowers, and tied my silver hair neatly back. As I looked at myself in the mirror, I smiled. Today, I wouldn't say much, but my silence would carry a storm. When I arrived, Grace greeted me with that tight smile she reserves for when her friends are watching. "Mom, you made it. Remember, we have guests today, so please," she didn't finish the sentence, but I knew what she meant. "Please don't embarrass us." Inside, her living room was filled with laughter, clinking glasses, and the scent of roasted chicken. Daniel was there too, arm around his wife, who looked at me with polite pity. They all treated me like fragile glass, but at the same time, like I was a burden. I took my seat at the table, smiling, listening, saying little. Every time I opened my mouth, I saw the flicker of anxiety in their eyes. So, I stayed silent. That silence screamed louder than any words I could have spoken. Midway through the meal, Grace's mother-in-law asked, "Margaret, how do you spend your days now?" Her tone was kind, genuine. I began to answer, but Daniel quickly cut in. "Oh, she just reads and gardens. You know, nothing interesting." The table laughed politely. My hands trembled under the table, but my face remained calm. I glanced at Daniel and Grace. They were so sure of themselves. They thought my silence meant surrender. After dessert, I excused myself to the bathroom, but instead, I stepped outside onto the patio. The cold air bit at my cheeks, grounding me. I pulled out my phone and called Mr. Collins. "Is everything ready?" I asked quietly. "Yes, Mrs. Hayes," he replied. "Everything is in motion. They won't see it coming." I hung up, slipping the phone back into my purse. I re-entered the room, smiling as if nothing had happened. Grace gave me a puzzled look, but said nothing. That night, as they dropped me off at my house, Daniel leaned in through the car window and said, "Thanks for behaving, Mom. You see how much smoother things go when you stay quiet." He laughed as he drove away. Little did he know, the quiet ones are the most dangerous. Over the next week, I began making arrangements. I visited the local charity, speaking with the director about my plans to leave them a large donation. The joy in her eyes was something I hadn't seen in my children's eyes in years. It felt good, so good, to know my life's work would go to people who truly valued me. I also met with Carla, my neighbor, and handed her a sealed envelope. "Don't open this unless something happens to me," I told her. Her eyes widened, but she nodded. She knew better than to ask questions. Each night, I wrote in my journal, documenting everything. My thoughts, my plans, my feelings. If Daniel and Grace ever read it, they would understand too late what they had lost. But fate has a way of testing you when you least expect it. The following weekend, there was another dinner, this time at Daniel's house. He insisted I come, and I agreed. When I arrived, I noticed whispers between him and Grace, nervous glances my way. Something was off. The meal began, and halfway through, Daniel raised his glass. "Mom, we've been thinking. Maybe it's time you moved into assisted living. You know, somewhere you'll be taken care of properly." The words hit me like a knife to the chest. Around the table, everyone nodded, smiling, as if they had done me a favor. My heart pounded, but I stayed calm. I smiled sweetly and said, "That's a wonderful idea. Thank you for thinking of me." They looked relieved. They didn't know I had already set the trap. Because what they didn't know was that I owned the house Daniel lived in. And soon, they would learn what happens when you push a mother too far. The shock on their faces when they discovered the truth? That moment was coming, and it would be glorious. What I did next would not only destroy their assumptions, it would turn their perfect little world upside down. Stay with me, because the next chapter will reveal the first crack in their facade, and you won't believe how fast everything unraveled. Please like, comment, and subscribe to this channel because the storm has only just begun. The morning after Daniel's smug proposal to put me in assisted living, I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the house deed clutched in my hands. This wasn't just a piece of paper, it was the power they didn't know I held. For years, I'd let them believe they were in control, that their opinions shaped my life. But they had no idea this house, Daniel's house, and even the vacation cabin Grace bragged about, all had my name quietly stitched into their histories. You see, when their father passed, I worked 3 jobs and invested carefully. Every property they claimed as theirs was made possible by my sacrifices and foresight. They had forgotten. I had not. I decided it was time to remind them. That afternoon, I drove to Mr. Collins' office. The air smelled of leather and polished wood as I entered. "Margaret," he said, standing to greet me. "Are you ready to finalize everything?" "Yes," I replied firmly. "Transfer the vacation cabin's ownership directly to the charity we discussed." As for Daniel's house, I paused, a slow smile creeping onto my face. "I'll keep it in my name, but include a clause. Upon my passing, it goes to the Library Foundation, not them." He looked at me, impressed. "They will be shocked. They need to be," I said. "They need to learn that love should never be taken for granted." We signed the documents, my hand steady with purpose. As I left, I felt lighter. But the storm was only beginning to brew. The following Sunday, I visited Daniel's house unannounced. The look on his face was a mix of surprise and annoyance. "Mom, you should call before coming," he said, glancing around as if I were an inconvenience. I handed him an envelope. "Read this when I'm gone," I said calmly. He laughed, thinking it was just another sentimental letter. Oh, how wrong he was. Grace arrived shortly after, her arms crossed as she eyed me. "Are you really considering the assisted living thing? It would make things easier." I looked her dead in the eyes. "Don't worry, sweetheart. Things will be easier very soon." That night, they hosted another dinner with their friends. I stayed quiet, as I always did now. Their friends asked me questions, and every time I opened my mouth, Daniel quickly redirected the conversation. Grace kept giving me warning glances, like a teacher scolding a child. The humiliation simmered, but my smile never faltered. As we cleared the table, I overheard Daniel whisper to his wife, "Once Mom's in the home, we can finally renovate and rent out her place." That's extra income. My heart froze for a moment, but then I felt something sharper than pain, vindication. They thought my silence meant ignorance. They were about to learn it meant strategy. When I got home, I pulled out my journal and wrote, "They've sealed their own fate." Over the next week, I began moving my valuables, my documents, and every sentimental piece I owned into a storage unit under my name only. If they wanted to strip me of my dignity, they would find themselves stripped of everything they expected to inherit. But the universe wasn't done testing me. One evening, Grace came over unannounced. She walked through my door without knocking, sighing loudly. "Mom, have you thought about the facility we mentioned?" Daniel and I toured it. "It's decent." I looked at her and smiled. "That's sweet of you, Grace. But I've already made my decision." "What decision?" she asked, confused. "You'll see soon enough," I replied softly. The anger flashed in her eyes. "Why do you have to be so difficult?" I didn't answer. Instead, I poured her tea, calm as ever. She left shortly after, muttering under her breath about how stubborn I was. That night, I sealed another set of legal documents and placed them in my safe deposit box. Each paper was a nail in the coffin of their entitlement. The next family dinner was only days away, and that's when everything would start to unravel. Because I was no longer the quiet mother they thought they could control, I was the storm they didn't see coming. And when they finally discovered the truth, the expression on their faces would be worth every ounce of pain they had caused me. Stay tuned, because in the next chapter, the first shocking reveal shatters their perfect little world, and you will not believe their reaction. Please like, comment, and subscribe to this channel, because the best is yet to come. The next family dinner was at Daniel's house again. This time, I wore my pearls, the ones their father gave me on our 10th anniversary. They gleamed under the light as if they knew this night would mark the beginning of something monumental. I walked into that house with a grace they didn't deserve, my heart pounding but my head held high. From the moment I stepped in, I felt the tension. Grace's husband barely looked at me. Daniel greeted me with a forced smile, while Grace whispered something to her friend, both of them laughing under their breath. I sat down quietly, folding my hands in my lap. They thought I was harmless. They thought I was silent. But inside, I was roaring. Halfway through the dinner, as their friends chatted, Daniel decided to bring up the assisted living idea again, this time in front of everyone. "Mom," he said, smiling like he was doing me a favor, "Grace and I found a beautiful place for you. It has a garden, a library, you'll love it there. It's better than rattling around in that big house alone." The table chuckled politely. My fork froze midair. I looked him straight in the eyes and said, "That's thoughtful of you, Daniel. But I won't be moving anywhere." He frowned. "Mom, be reasonable. It's for your own good." "No," I said softly but firmly. The table went silent. "It's for your convenience, not my good." He opened his mouth to argue, but I calmly sipped my water, letting the silence choke him instead. Grace jumped in. "Mom, why do you have to make everything difficult? We're trying to help you." I smiled. "You've helped enough." For the rest of the meal, they ignored me, talking around me as though I were invisible. But invisibility can be a weapon. They didn't realize every word they spoke, every condescending laugh, was carving their own downfall. After dinner, when the guests were gone, I asked to speak to Daniel and Grace privately. They exchanged a puzzled glance, but followed me into the living room. I pulled a small envelope from my purse and placed it on the table. "This," I said, "is for you. Do not open it now. Open it when you think you're ready to hear the truth." Grace rolled her eyes. "Mom, what is this drama?" Daniel chuckled nervously. "Mom, you don't need to do all this. Just..." I cut him off. "No, Daniel. You've spoken enough. You'll understand soon." I walked out, leaving them stunned. That night, as I closed my front door, I felt the weight of decades lift off my shoulders. For the first time in years, I slept like a baby. The next morning, I received a call from Carla, my neighbor. "Margaret, I did what you asked. Everything is ready." My heart swelled with gratitude. Everything was falling perfectly into place. A few days later, I made an unexpected move. I put my house up for rent. The sign went up, and within hours, Daniel called.
Mom,
"Why is there a for rent sign at your house?" "Oh, that," I said sweetly. "I've decided to travel for a while. Maybe spend some time with people who appreciate me." "Travel? At your age," he snapped. "Where will you go?" "That's my business," I replied and hung up. Grace showed up at my door not long after, fuming. "Mom, this is ridiculous. You're being dramatic." I looked at her calmly. "Grace, one day you'll regret the way you speak to me. But by then, it will be too late." She stormed out, muttering insults under her breath. She had no idea her world was about to collapse. Later that evening, I met with the charity director again. The final paperwork transferring the vacation cabin to their ownership was signed. The woman hugged me, tears in her eyes. "You're changing so many lives, Margaret." I smiled. That's all I ever wanted to matter. Meanwhile, Daniel and Grace were still in the dark, still smug, still blind to the storm I had set in motion. But the cracks were beginning to show. Daniel started calling more frequently, his tone less confident. Grace began asking probing questions, sensing something was wrong. And then came the moment that set everything ablaze. Daniel's wife called me, her voice trembling. "Margaret, we just got something in the mail. Is this? You wouldn't?" I smiled to myself. "Yes," I said softly. "It's exactly what you think." Because the letter they received was the first official notice that their home, the one they believed was theirs, was legally still mine. And they had 30 days to vacate unless they wanted to pay me rent. The panic in their voices was delicious. But this was just the beginning. Because in the next chapter, Daniel and Grace's world shatters completely, and you will not believe how far they go to try and stop me. The night after they received the eviction notice, my phone rang endlessly. First Daniel called, then Grace. I didn't answer. The silence they forced on me at every dinner was now the silence they had to endure. They wanted me to be quiet?
fine.
I would let my actions do the talking. By the third call, Daniel left a voicemail. His voice was dripping with anger. "Mom, this has to be a mistake. You can't just take our house away. We have a family. Call me back." But I didn't call. Instead, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat on my porch, listening to the night. For the first time in years, I felt alive. The next morning, Grace showed up at my door, banging like a madwoman.
Mom,
"Open this door right now," she yelled. I opened it slowly, meeting her furious glare with calm eyes. "You can't do this to us," she said, shoving the notice in my face. "You're a mother. This is cruel." I raised an eyebrow. "Cruel? Grace, do you remember the dinner where you told me not to speak because I embarrass you? Do you remember every time you made me feel like a burden in my own children's lives?" She faltered, her mouth opening but no words coming out. "You forgot who I am," I said softly. "And now, you're remembering." She stormed off, muttering curses. I watched her go, feeling no guilt. Sometimes, tough lessons are the ones that stick. That afternoon, Daniel came by. Unlike Grace, he tried to act calm. "Mom, let's talk," he said. "We can fix this. Just take back the notice." I shook my head. "It's not a mistake, Daniel. You need to understand there are consequences for disrespecting the very person who gave you everything." His jaw clenched. "So this is revenge?" "No," I said with a smile. "This is accountability." He left, slamming the door. As days passed, their calls turned from anger to desperation. Daniel offered to take better care of me. Grace promised to visit more often. Their sudden kindness was hollow, a performance driven by fear of losing what they believed was theirs. But the legal clock was ticking. Meanwhile, I spent my days finalizing more transfers. I had Mr. Collins add another clause to my will. Not only would Daniel's house revert to the Library Foundation upon my death, but the rent they were about to pay would also go into a scholarship fund for underprivileged kids. Every cent would serve a purpose greater than their entitlement. One evening, Linda came over with cookies, her eyes gleaming with curiosity. "So, Margaret, how long before the hammer drops completely?" I chuckled. Oh, it's dropping soon. They'll have to face the truth at the next family dinner. The night of the dinner arrived. Daniel and Grace both showed up at my house, faces pale and tense. They thought maybe they could reason with me, charm me, manipulate me into reversing my decisions. As we sat at the table, I served them tea. Grace spoke first, her voice trembling. Mom, please, we were wrong. Just don't take her home. Daniel added, we'll do better. We'll respect you, we promise. I sipped my tea and said nothing. Finally, I placed a second envelope on the table. This, I said, is the final arrangement. Read it when you get home. Grace reached for it, but I pulled it back.
No, not yet.
Read it when you're alone. And when you do, you'll finally understand what you lost. They left in silence, clutching the envelope as if it were their last hope. That night, I could almost hear their screams echoing across the city as they opened it. Inside were the official papers. Their house was legally under my control, and effective immediately, they were tenants. Rent was due in 15 days. Failure to pay would mean eviction. The next morning, Daniel called, voice shaking with rage. Mom, how could you do this to us? We're your children. You stopped being my children the moment you stopped respecting me, I said calmly. You'll either pay like tenants or leave like strangers. The line went dead, but the battle was far from over. Because in their desperation, Daniel and Grace were about to cross a line they could never uncross, one that would make the final showdown inevitable. And when they did, they would finally learn what it means to underestimate a mother. Stay tuned, because in the next chapter, they make a dangerous move that pushes me to unleash the full extent of my plan. The tension was like a storm cloud hovering over us. I could feel it in every step I took, every time the phone rang. Daniel and Grace had stopped begging. Their voices had turned cold, sharp with resentment. I knew that look in their eyes, the look of people plotting something they think they can get away with. 3 days later, I came home to find my mailbox ripped open and my garden gate hanging off its hinges. The flowers I had tended so lovingly were trampled. My heart sank, but I didn't cry. Instead, I walked inside, locked my door, and dialed the police. When the officer arrived, he looked at the damage and frowned. Do you have any idea who might have done this? I nodded slowly.
Yes.
My children. He raised a brow. You sure? I'm old, not blind, I said. But don't worry. I have security cameras. They forgot I installed them. The officer checked the footage, and there they were, Daniel and Grace, in the middle of the night, ripping my mailbox apart like rebellious teenagers. My chest tightened. This was no longer just disrespect. This was war. The officer filed a report, but I didn't press charges. Not yet. I wanted them to think they had gotten away with it. People like them reveal their true selves when they believe there are no consequences. That same night, Linda came over. When she saw the damage, she gasped. Margaret. They've lost their minds. I smiled faintly.
No, Linda.
They've lost control. And soon, they'll lose everything else. The next morning, I called Mr. Collins. Accelerate everything, I said. Transfer the ownership of my remaining assets immediately. I want no trace of my properties tied to them. He agreed, and within 48 hours, every document was finalized. Daniel and Grace had no idea they were now legally renting a house owned by the woman they tried to silence. 2 days later, Daniel showed up at my door, fists clenched. Mom, this has to stop. We're your children. You're supposed to love us. I do love you, I said calmly. But love doesn't mean tolerating abuse. You've mistaken my kindness for weakness. Grace appeared from behind him, her face twisted with anger. You're punishing us because we told you not to embarrass us? You're overreacting. I looked her straight in the eyes.
No, Grace.
You humiliated me. You made me feel small in front of strangers. And now, you're learning what small feels like. They stormed off, shouting threats as they went. My hands trembled, but my resolve remained unshaken. That night, I received an anonymous call. A man's voice, low, cold. Back off, old lady. Sign your properties over to your kids, or things will get worse. I froze, but only for a moment, because I knew that voice belonged to one of Daniel's friends, the one who always hung around like a shadow. My children had crossed a line so deep, there was no coming back. Instead of fear, I felt power surge through me. The next day, I hired private security and had my locks changed. I also gave copies of all my legal documents to Linda with instructions. If anything happened to me, the media would know the truth. The following weekend, I received a letter slipped under my door. It was from Daniel. The handwriting was messy, desperate. "Mom, if you don't undo this, you'll regret it." I laughed bitterly. Regret? The only thing I regretted was raising children who valued my money over my dignity. But the storm was far from over, because what I did next would turn their threats into ashes. I gathered my evidence, prepared my final moves, and set a date for the ultimate reveal. Daniel and Grace thought they were cornering me, but they were walking straight into my trap. The next family dinner was approaching, and I had a surprise waiting for them, one that would leave them trembling. Stay with me, because in the next chapter, everything explodes. The confrontation you've been waiting for is about to happen, and you won't believe who takes my side. The day of the final family dinner arrived like the calm before a storm. The sky was gray, heavy with clouds, as if the universe itself knew something was about to break. I dressed deliberately in black, a quiet armor, and wore the pearl necklace once more. Every step to Daniel's house was measured, every breath laced with resolve. When I arrived, the atmosphere was strange. Daniel greeted me with a fake smile that didn't reach his eyes, and Grace barely acknowledged me at all. I could see the tension in their bodies, like coiled snakes ready to strike. Their friends were there again, laughing, sipping wine, oblivious to the storm about to hit. Dinner began with forced pleasantries. I kept my eyes on my plate, silent, letting them think they were still in control. Daniel raised his glass halfway through the meal. "Mom," he said loudly, "we know you've been upset, but this nonsense with the house has to stop. You're not thinking straight. We're family. You can't treat us like strangers." The room went silent, everyone watching. Grace smirked. "Tell them, Mom. Tell everyone how you're trying to evict your own children. They should hear what kind of mother you've become." I slowly put down my fork, wiped my mouth with a napkin, and stood. My hands didn't shake. My voice was calm, cold. "You want them to hear the truth? Then let's give them the truth." I reached into my purse and pulled out a folder. Inside were copies of all the documents, proof of ownership, transfers, and their eviction notice. I placed them one by one on the table. "Daniel, Grace," I said, "you do not own this house. You never did. It's mine. And as of last week, the rent you pay goes directly into a fund for children who need it more than you ever will." Gasps echoed around the table. Grace's face turned pale. Daniel's jaw dropped. "What is this?" he stammered. "This," I said firmly, "is the price of your arrogance. You mocked me, silenced me, and tried to strip me of my dignity. I warned you. You didn't listen." Grace stood, her voice shaking with fury. "You can't do this. We're your children. We deserve." "You deserve nothing you haven't earned," I cut her off sharply. "And all you've earned is the consequence of your own cruelty." Daniel slammed his fist on the table. "You're destroying this family." I leaned forward, my voice steady.
No, Daniel.
"You destroyed it the moment you treated me like a burden instead of a mother." For a moment, no one spoke. The only sound was the ticking of the clock on the wall. Then, from the far end of the table, Daniel's wife spoke softly. "She's right." All eyes turned to her. Tears welled in her eyes as she continued, "I've watched you both belittle her for years. She gave you everything, and you've done nothing but take. You should be ashamed." Grace's face twisted with rage. "Whose side are you on?" "The side of the woman who raised you," she snapped back. Daniel was speechless. Grace sat down, trembling. I gathered my papers and turned to leave. "You have 30 days to decide if you want to stay here as tenants or leave. The choice is yours. But understand this, my silence is over." I walked out into the cold night air, my head high. For the first time in years, I felt powerful. But deep inside, I also felt sorrow. I had never wanted it to come to this. Yet sometimes, love requires letting go. As I closed my car door, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "You'll regret this. Watch your back." I stared at the message, my heart pounding. The storm wasn't over, it was only getting darker. Because Daniel and Grace weren't finished. They were about to make a desperate move that would push me to the edge of everything I had fought to protect. And when they did, they would learn that this old woman still had one last weapon to unleash. Stay tuned, because in the next chapter, their final act of defiance takes a shocking turn, and I do something no one ever expected. The text message kept me awake all night. Every creak in the house, every shadow against the curtains made my heart race. I knew my children were angry, but this was different. This was a threat. A mother's instinct never lies. Something terrible was brewing. By morning, I had already taken precautions. The security cameras were working, my private guard patrolled the street, and Linda had a copy of every document and recording in case anything happened to me. I wasn't afraid, but I was ready. 2 nights later, my fear was confirmed. At around midnight, the alarm screamed. I jolted from bed, heart pounding. Checking the cameras, I saw 2 figures in hoodies sneaking around my back door. They moved quickly, trying to pry it open. I called the police immediately, my voice calm. "They're here. Send someone now." Within minutes, red and blue lights filled the street. The intruders tried to run, but the officers caught them. When they pulled the hoods back, my heart sank. It was Daniel's friend, the same one who had called me, and Grace's boyfriend. My knees nearly gave out. The officer asked, "Do you want to press charges?" I looked at the 2 of them trembling under the flashlight beams. "Not yet," I said, "but keep the report open. I'll need it." When Daniel came to bail them out, he didn't even look at me. The next morning, Grace stormed into my house, screaming, "You set them up. You're tearing this family apart." I stood calmly in the doorway. "Grace, they broke into my home. I didn't set them up. They set themselves up." She cursed at me and left. My hands trembled, but not from fear. This was the final straw. They had gone too far. There was no turning back. The following day, I called Mr. Collins. "Activate the final clause," I said. That afternoon, letters were delivered to Daniel and Grace. Not only were they officially evicted, but an emergency injunction barred them from contacting me directly. Any harassment, any threats, and the police would have full authority to act. Hours later, Daniel appeared outside my gate, screaming like a madman.
Mom.
"You can't do this to us. We're your blood." I stood on the porch, staring at him through the bars. "You've already done this to yourselves, Daniel." His voice cracked with desperation. "You'll die alone." I walked back inside without a word, locking the door behind me. That night, something unexpected happened. As I sat in my living room, there was a knock at the door. It wasn't aggressive, just soft, hesitant. When I opened it, I found Daniel's wife standing there, tears streaming down her face. "Margaret," she whispered, "I'm sorry. I tried to stop them. They've lost themselves. But I haven't. If you'll let me, I'll stand with you." I hugged her, feeling a lump in my throat. "You're braver than both of them combined," I said. For the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of hope. But it didn't last long. 2 days later, I received an envelope shoved under my door. Inside was a single note, written in Grace's handwriting. "If we can't have it, no one will." My blood ran cold. I checked the cameras, doubled the locks, but the fear lingered. They were planning something bigger. That night, as I sat in the dark, I heard the faint sound of footsteps outside. Then, the smell of smoke. My heart stopped. Rushing to the window, I saw flames licking the edge of my garden fence. They were trying to burn me out. The fire department arrived quickly, but the damage was done. Not to the house, but to my heart. My children had crossed the ultimate line. They weren't just trying to scare me anymore. They wanted me gone. I stood in the ashes of my garden the next morning, tears streaming down my face. Linda came over, horrified, but I wiped my cheeks and straightened my back. "This ends now," I said coldly. "No more warnings. No more mercy." I called my lawyer and the police, giving them every recording, every piece of evidence. Arrest warrants were filed. Daniel and Grace didn't know it yet, but their freedom was hanging by a thread. And I wasn't done. The final chapter of my plan was about to unfold, and it would not only expose them to the world, it would leave them with nothing. The storm had reached its peak, and the next move would be mine. Because in the final chapter, the truth explodes in front of everyone, and I do something that shocks the entire town. Stay with me, because what happens next is the ultimate twist, and you will not believe how it ends. Please like, comment, and subscribe to this channel, because the final chapter is the one you've been waiting for. The morning after the fire, the sky was eerily clear, as if mocking the smoke-stained remains of my garden. I stood on my porch with a cup of coffee, watching the sun rise. My heart was heavy, but my resolve was unshakable. This was the day everything would change. By noon, I was at the courthouse with Mr. Collins. He handed me the final set of documents. "Margaret, once this is signed, it's irreversible," he said quietly. I looked him straight in the eye.
Good.
That's exactly how I want it. The papers officially transferred Daniel's house to the Library Foundation, effective immediately. Not upon my death, not years from now. Grace's name was removed from every asset she thought she would inherit. The charity and scholarship funds were secured, untouchable. My children had lost everything in one stroke of a pen. But I wasn't done yet. That evening, I arranged a community meeting at the town hall. Word spread quickly. Neighbors, friends, and even local reporters showed up. Daniel and Grace, curious and panicked, came as well. They walked in with forced confidence, but I could see the fear in their eyes. I stood at the podium, my voice steady as the room fell silent. I called you all here tonight to tell the truth. For too long, I've stayed quiet while my own children disrespected me, humiliated me, and tried to take everything I built. They even tried to burn me out of my own home. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Daniel's face turned pale. Grace's hands trembled. "I have proof," I continued, holding up photos, security footage, and the police reports. Proof of their threats, their break-ins, and their attempt to destroy me. You can all see for yourselves what they've become. Whispers filled the room as the evidence played on a screen. Faces turned toward them with shock and disgust. Grace burst into tears, shaking her head. Daniel tried to shout, "She's lying," but his voice cracked under the weight of the truth. I raised a hand, silencing him. "You thought I was weak. You thought you could silence me. But today, everyone hears my voice." The room erupted in applause. Even the reporters scribbled furiously, knowing they were witnessing something unforgettable. I took a deep breath, then delivered the final blow. As of this morning, Daniel's house belongs to the Library Foundation. Grace, you own nothing from me. My will no longer includes either of you. Instead, everything I have will go to charities, scholarships, and the people who truly cared for me. You will leave tonight with nothing but the consequences of your actions. Grace collapsed into a chair, sobbing. Daniel stood frozen, his jaw clenched, his pride shattered. For the first time, they had no power. As I stepped down from the podium, Daniel's wife approached me. She hugged me tightly and whispered, "Thank you for standing up for yourself." They needed to learn. Tears streamed down my face, but they were tears of victory. The police arrived minutes later to serve Daniel and Grace with charges for attempted arson and harassment. They were led away in handcuffs, their screams echoing through the hall. The crowd watched in stunned silence. Outside, the night air felt fresh and clean, as if the storm had finally passed. Linda stood beside me, smiling proudly. "You did it, Margaret. You really did it." I nodded, my heart lighter than it had been in years. I told them I'd stay quiet. They never understood that my silence was my strength. In the days that followed, the community treated me with respect and admiration. My story spread, inspiring others to stand up for themselves. The Library Foundation named a new wing after me, and the scholarship fund in my name began helping countless children. Daniel and Grace? They had to start over, stripped of the entitlement they once clung to. For the first time, they learned what it meant to work for something, to live without the safety net they took for granted. I never stopped loving them, but love doesn't mean allowing abuse. Sometimes, the greatest act of love is letting someone fall so they can learn to stand. To those watching and listening now, remember this. Never let anyone silence you, no matter who they are. Respect is not given because of blood, it's earned by how you treat people. As I sit here in my quiet home, sipping tea, I feel no regret, only peace. Because I found my voice again, and in doing so, I found myself. Thank you for staying with me through this journey. If my story touched your heart and reminded you of your own strength, please like, comment, and subscribe to this channel. Your story matters too.